Hey everybody, I wanted to take just a couple minutes and review the first Eric Clapton solo album. It came out in 1970. I bought this album at Johnny B. Good's record and tape store in Wheaton, Illinois back in the 70s when I was early in high school. I don't even think I was upperclassman in high school, but I bought this album and it's always been one of my favorite albums. But just a little background, that's a great picture. And one of my favorite details here is that is Brownie. Now, Brownie is probably one of the most famous electric guitars ever. So that's Brownie. It's a lot of you probably know the story of Brownie. It was a 2 or 3 color sunburst. I always get those mixed up. But he bought this guitar and Blackie and some other Strats at Nashville for a couple $100. I think I read 400, but I think I've even heard figures less than 400. All these vintage like Strats from the late 50s. Today those vintage instruments would be probably tens of thousands of dollars a piece. But I love that picture of Brownie. Look, the fretboard's all worn out on it. Now if you look at this album, this is Derek and the Dominoes in concert. You have a really good picture of Brownie. Let's see. We'll get it there. Yeah. That's a good shot. This is another album I've had a lot of years. There's Brownie. But that's Brownie. Brownie's always been my favorite, and I'm very partial to those tobacco bursts. Whether it's 2 or 3 color, I always like that kind of tobacco, kind of whiskey looking, very masculine look of those. That is my favorite electric guitar color, is the burst, the tobacco burst, I always call it. But it's just a great album. You will have heard several of the songs on this album. It has Let It Rain on it. It has After Midnight, which I think was his first J.J. Cale song. Of course, he ended up doing Cocaine, and at least one other J.J. Cale song on Backless, which is one of my favorite J.J. Cale songs he ever did. I'll Make Love to You Any Old Time. On the back, it's got a picture of all the people involved with this album. There's Clapton, and you've got Bobby Whitlock. You can watch his channel. There's Rita Coolidge, who I think was pretty friendly with Jim Gordon, the drummer, who's back there. And you've got Jim Price and Bobby Keys, the great horn section. They were on a bunch of good albums. Bobby Keys on saxophone played the awesome saxophone solo on the Rolling Stones' Brown Sugar. But one of the things about this album is I think it reflects someone who's not as famous as Eric Clapton. If you like Eric Clapton, you probably have heard of him. That's Delaney Bramlett and his wife Bonnie Bramlett, who's up there. Delaney Bramlett and Bonnie Bramlett and their band was Carl Rattle, who plays bass on this album, Jim Gordon, who plays drums on this album, and Bobby Whitlock, who plays keys on this album, and also sings background vocals. And they were the Delaney and Bonnie group, and they warmed up for Blind Faith the year before, so Clapton really got to know Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett. And I think he was pretty close with all that band. And for a while there was really close with Delaney Bramlett, who was just one of those real natural songwriters. Someone that when he picked up a guitar, he didn't care, what people were thinking, and all these songs would kind of fly out of him. And he wrote all these kind of nice songs, often compared maybe to the band, which was another influence Clapton had around this time, Music of the Big Pink. So this was the first Eric Clapton solo album that kind of came out right around that time on the heels of Delaney Bramlett's very positive influence, I would say, at least musically speaking. And it's a really good album, and it's got more of a song sensibility. I think they were kind of looking for a song sensibility on Blind Faith more, but I think this one is even more so. You've got Bobby Whitlock on there. And of course, this band, or the core of that band, went on to be Derek and the Dominoes. So really, Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett, this album. And then Derek and the Dominoes, it was all the same bunch of guys. And after Derek and the Dominoes kind of crashed and burned, some of those guys went on to play on this album, which is Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which is also a great, great album. And it's got Carl Rattle and Jim Gordon on it, and also Leon Russell. Now, Leon Russell's on this album, too. Leon Russell's on this album, and there he is right there. That's Leon Russell. So a lot of these people ended up playing on this album, which is Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which has got to be one of the great live albums ever. One of my favorite guitar solos on this album is Bottle of Red Wine. Oh, man, a bottle of red wine. Some might say a little bit sexist. Get up, get your man a bottle of red wine. I think he's talking to his woman. Get up, get your man a bottle of red. I got my Hardaway one. But it's got a really nice guitar solo. It's just really... Get up. Yeah, it's just a super duper good guitar solo. It's just a little pass through the main chorus of the song, but it's a great guitar solo. And of course, Let It Rain's on there. You've got you've got that great middle section of Let It Rain. I'm a little out of tune, but anyway. Just such a great song. And when I was in high school, right around the time I bought this album, a friend of mine had a older friend who was about 30, and I would have been like 16 or 17 at the time, and he was about 30, and he was a huge Eric Clapton fan going back to the Yardbirds. I mean, he was like old school 60s music, and he had a Gibson Melody Maker, but he came over to my room one time and was talking about Eric Clapton, and he showed me how to play this, and it's one of those moments that, looking back on it, made a big difference in my life and music. He showed me how to do that, which is Let It Rain, and he also showed me how to do this, like that riff, which were all kind of what he said were Clapton type riffs. But it's also got some Beatles type sound. It reminds me a little bit in particular of the way Ringo Starr's solo music in the 70s sounded, or George Harrison's. The one thing I will say about it, I don't know if it's how it was recorded or their approach to the songs. Some of these songs I think could have been more epic. When you listen to this, and some of it might be Clapton singing versus Joe Cocker, because as great, as great a guitar player as Clapton is, Joe Cocker's that great a singer. And when Joe Cocker sings, he just sort of kicks the band's ass to really play harder, because he's such a driving singer. These songs are kind of pulled back, like "Let It Rain." I was thinking, man, if you could have heard, it would be nice to hear "Let It Rain" just as this kind of epic jam, and it has a longer solo on it, but it sounds a lot of the albums sound, some people call it thin sounding, and some people often attribute that to Clapton moving from Gibson to Strats, and the Strat sound is kind of a thin sound. But I don't really think that, because if you like Strats like I do, they can look at Robin Trower, Hendrix, they all played Strats. But I think it's kind of how it's recorded. The rhythm section could be cranked up more in the speakers, so you get that big kind of hit your chest sound like you do on Mad Dogs and Englishmen, like Delta Lady and all those great Superstar, all those songs. It's the same band. It wasn't, and it was just recorded a little while later. But I think it sort of is more epic and kind of rock and roll. It just drives you more. And this album, I think, has a thin sound. Sometimes people attribute that to Clapton's Strat, but I think some of it's the mix on the rhythm section too. It kind of is down, and his voice is pretty out front. And his voice is kind of a thin voice, particularly in this period. He hadn't been singing. This is the first album where he really was the singer on the album. So his voice is kind of thin and young. But I think maybe they could have mixed his voice down a little bit and cranked up that great rhythm section they had on this album, and just like really boomed it out in the speakers, and maybe in the studio too. So that would be one criticism I have of the album. I don't think it sounds as good as other albums that are from this period. Led Zeppelin 4 came out right around this time. Led Zeppelin 1, look how good those albums sound even today. And this one I don't think sounds as good. Ringo Starr, his stuff from the 70s sounds great. And as we look at this album, I think it's, just all the people. Carl Rattles died. I think Delaney Bramlett. A lot of these people have passed on. I think Bobby Keys. I don't want to get one wrong, so I'll stop. Jim Gordon just died. Tragedy of Jim Gordon. But it's a really good album. But it's a good album. It's got some good songs. Loving You, Loving Me, Told You for the Last Time. And I Don't Know Why. Those are good songs. That I Don't Know Why is a really good song. It's another one where I think his voice is a little too out front, and the rhythm section could have been louder, but it could have been like It Makes No Difference, or The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, or some of those great band songs. But it sounds a little thin. It doesn't quite kick your butt the way some of those other songs do, but stylistically, it's a great song. After Midnight's a great song. Lonesome and a Long Way from Home, that's a good one. Bad Boy Slunky, that's kind of a jam. Some of the jams, like Lonesome and a Long, so at the beginning it starts out and it sounds kind of like maybe Muscle Shoals, just kind of good R&B, Stax or something like that. Some of those old Stax albums. Sound-wise, those might be some of the best songs on the album. And I do think when you get into side 2 and some of those ballads, they're really good, but they either weren't as recorded as well or anything, because you don't get that fullness of a great rhythm section, and maybe Clapton's voice is a little too loud. That's my personal opinion. But definitely a great album. Not only a great album, but an important album. And hats off to Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett, that I just think it shows what important figures they were in music. And sometimes, they maybe didn't end up being the huge stars that Clapton did, and some of these other people but they were great. If you don't know Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett, a song you might have heard that they did was "I Got a Never-Ending Song of You." I got a never-ending love for you from now on. It's kind of one of those songs you just tap your foot to. A little bit of Americana country, which I would say this album has, or at least it's trying to evoke kind of an American feel. And a lot of these players were American. So, but it's a great album and it's an important album. But it's just a really good album, and if you're an Eric Clapton fan, it's kind of a must-have. And I think you'll enjoy it just as a musical effort, and also understanding a little bit about why it's such an important album in the history of classic rock and Clapton's long career will make you appreciate it even more. And hats off to Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett. Thanks. God bless.